We have two Bible readings in our minds this morning. One is from Isaiah chapter 55, verses 1 to 13, and the other from Matthew's Gospel, Matthew 18, verses 1 to 6. But we will actually make some comments a little bit wider afield from Matthew 18. So you might like to have those two passages open in your Bibles for us to look at together. The main focus of our time together is the verse that comes to us from Isaiah 55, where it says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways, declares the Lord." And if you just have a look at that verse, you'll find it in verse 9 and verse 8. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." Now, I don't know whether you picked up in that the structure of what those two verses look like, if you could imagine them. He starts with thoughts and ways, and then a statement about the heavens being higher than the earth, and then he goes ways and thoughts. And in the way that's written and constructed, it's sort of like an arrow. The ways and the thoughts and ways point to something in the middle, that as the heavens are high above the earth. In other words, there is a difference and an unbridgeable and undeniable and irreducible difference between the thoughts and ways of God and the thoughts and ways of us. Unbridgeable and irreducible as far as the heavens are above the earth. And that phrase, "as far as the heavens are above the earth," is a very particular phrase which has a particular meaning, and we'll come to that shortly. And so the main focus is the fact that God's thoughts and ways are not our thoughts and ways. And the second thing that flows from that is it's only because God's thoughts and ways are not like our thoughts of ways, it's because of that we are secure. If his thoughts and ways were like ours, we would have a right to be terrified for our eternal destiny. But his thoughts and ways are not like ours, and we're going to see why that is and how that is in a minute. So, in chapter 55, verses 8 and 9, there's three things we need to notice firstly by way of introduction. The first one I've already alluded to. One is a sort of parallel statement. My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. And those thoughts and ways, sandwiched in the middle, point to the fact that the heavens are higher, as the heavens are high above the earth, so is the difference between his thoughts and ways and ours. But there's a parallelism between his thoughts and his ways. And that's the first important thing we need to notice. God doesn't engage in any abstract thinking. He doesn't sit there, so to speak, in eternity and come up with philosophical ideas that are actionless or have no action attached to them. We pride ourselves on being able to come up with very great philosophical systems, and those philosophical systems may be entirely abstract in our thinking. And if we've mastered all of those great philosophical systems which are entirely abstract, we think that we've accomplished something, but they may have no effect on our ways, or, conversely, our thoughts, abstract though they be, may in fact be the rationalisation for why our ways are the way in which we walk. So you don't want to submit to God as a sinful humanity. You rationalise away the existence of God. We suppress the truth of God in deeds of unrighteousness, and we come up with a new philosophical thought system to explain why we have no need to walk in his ways. From God's point of view, we could say that there is no thought of God which is not an action of God. And there is no action of God, there is no way of God, there's nothing in his character that is not the expression of his innermost thoughts, in a manner of speaking. In an earthly sense, we may say, to quote the old King James Version of Proverbs chapter 23, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. As God thinketh in his, so is he. And there is no difference, no shadow of turning, not a hint of darkness that would indicate that there is a difference between the innermost life, so to speak, of God in his thoughts and the way that's revealed to us in his ways. Second thing, just to pick up from this verse as we go through, is that there is a difference in the essential nature of what we mean by God's thoughts. And here, when we speak of God's thoughts, we have to have those in inverted commas. God is gracious, and he accommodates himself to our language so that as he speaks we can understand the things that he reveals to us. But if you think about it, I think, you will come to the conclusion that God doesn't think. We think. We have secondary data, and we bring all of those data together, and we ponder, and we engage in a cost-benefit analysis, and then we develop a strategy, and then we implement that strategy, and then we review the strategy, and then we think some more about it, and then we see if it's worked. Now, that process does not belong to God in any way. God does not have secondary data which he must somehow weigh up and think, now what am I going to do with this? It's not as though before the foundation of the world God had to think long and hard to come up with a cost-benefit analysis to describe the plan of salvation. God doesn't cogitate and meditate on what might be if certain circumstances take place. Certain circumstances take place because God has decreed them. Things are the way they are, not because God sees down the mists of time or through the mists of time and comes to a conclusion about what he might do in those circumstances. The things are the way they are because time itself has come as a gift of God. The whole creation has come into being by his word. He has ordered everything according to his providential purpose, according to his will, and therefore things are the way they are. He is not taking in under his purview secondary sets of data to which he then has to subject some cosmic thinking. His thoughts are not our thoughts at the level of the essential nature of what it means to be a creature and what it means to him to be the creator. His thoughts are not our thoughts. They can be. It's not like we've got mere puny creature minds and comparatively speaking they've only got 4 gigabytes of computing power, and God, because he's God, he's got this really big super mind, and that's got 10 billion terabytes of computing power. And because he's got such a big super fast computer, he can come to things much more quickly than we do. It's not like that at all. God is God. And with the word, he brings the whole creation into being. He doesn't have to think about it and come up with a theory about how he might do it. So when we read the scriptures, when we read of God's thoughts, we don't want to read back into that the thinking process that we go through. God does not think in that way. Things are because he orders them to be that way. And when you think about our thinking, most of our thinking is expended on our knowledge, or on the basis of our knowledge of what's good and what's evil. So we think about how we can achieve an outcome for ourselves which we think is going to be a good outcome, and how we can avoid an outcome for ourselves which we think might be an evil outcome. So we spend all of our time thinking about what's good and what's evil for us. It's always for us. And we can think about how that might be worked out in our life. And we've got this really detailed plan in order to accomplish what's good for us and avoid what's evil for us. And guess what happens? Your wife's got another one. Or your husband's got another one. Or your kids have got another one. Or even worse, God's got another one. And so we think then about how we can engage in moving that person from there to here, and suddenly we've got a whole world. It's called politics. God's thinking is not like that, because he's not weighing up in eternity what's good and what's evil. How can I get a good outcome here? He alone is good. And we, who've wanted to know good and evil off our own bat, we who've wanted to be able to define for ourselves what's good and evil, then go through this tortured intellectual process of working out how we're going to get the good thing for us. So there is a difference in the essential nature of the way we speak about God's thinking and our thinking, God's thoughts and our thoughts. But that's actually not really the main point of the passage. That's just a background piece of data which is there from the scriptures, we could say. The main point is the quality difference, the difference in quality, the difference in type, the difference of character. My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways. Does not refer to the difference in capacity, but to the difference in quality. You'll notice in verse 8, starts with the word for in most translations. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways. What is that for? For? Let him return to the Lord, and he will have compassion on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. If you were to know the history of Israel up until this point, you would find that it had been an unrelenting story of rebellion and hatred and spiritual adultery towards God, their spiritual husband. It had been a continual story of exchanging the truth of God for a lie. It had been a story where his prophets had been murdered and those who brought his word had been hated and rejected. It was a story where they had entered into alliances with all sorts of other gods through their king nations. And in those alliances with those other gods, they had sought to secure themselves against God. And time again, as God spoke the word to them, their ears were blocked and their necks were stiff and their hearts were hardened, and he still kept speaking. And in his covenant faithfulness, they came to the point where there was an exile and there was judgment. But that was not the end of the story. It was so that they could be brought back. And so when he speaks to them about the necessity for them to turn, to come, to repent, to believe, to receive, to buy without cost, it's because his ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. Like, to put it very simply, we don't love our enemies. We don't pray for those who despitefully use us. We don't do good to those who hate us. And we certainly don't, in Isaiah 53, send his Son as the suffering servant. And we don't number the Son who is one with the Father in all of his thought and action and intent. We don't number him with the transgressors. And in our thoughts, we don't give up our most precious possession, our only Son. We don't, in our thoughts and our ways, abandon him up to sin so that those who have only hated us could be blessed by having their guilt removed. Those thoughts are not our thoughts, and those ways are not our ways. And he's saying to the people here in Israel, if my thoughts were your thoughts and if my ways were your ways, you'd be sent out of the classroom and there'd be never a way back ever. But my thoughts are not your thoughts and my ways are not your ways. And because I'm not as you are in relationship to the enemies that you have made yourselves to be to me, because I am not that way that you are to your enemies, so come. Yes, you've been wretched, horrible sinners. Yes, you've abandoned your love. Yes, you have broken the covenant. But does that stop my love for you? No. Does that stop my grace flowing to you like an ever-flowing stream? No. Does that stop me offering to you in this great, wretched, rebellious state of yours? Does that stop me offering to you bread and milk, which you can have without cost, which satisfies your heart? No, none of that stops, because my ways are not your ways, neither are your thoughts my thoughts. Now, remember what I said about the way those phrases focus in on as the heavens are high above the earth, and it's sort of like an arrow and it points to that. You think, well, that's not very special. Well, I didn't think it was very special until during the week I looked and looked and looked, and to my knowledge, could be corrected, I can't find one place in the Scriptures where that phrase, as the heavens are high above the earth, where it's not connected with the forgiveness of sins, with the mercy of God, with the loving kindness of God, with the covenant faithfulness of God. Just have a look at one example, Psalm 103. You can pick it up in verse 11. Some of you are getting there quicker than I am this morning. Verse 10. He has not dealt with us according to our sins, nor rewarded us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, see that phrase? So great is his loving kindness towards those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. Just as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. Right in the middle. As high as the heavens are above the earth. And it's speaking about the way he comes to us in the forgiveness of our sins, removing our iniquities, and how he comes to us in his loving kindness. And every time you find that phrase in the Old Testament, as far as the heavens are above the earth, so is my faithfulness, so is my love, so is my forgiveness, so is my mercy, so is my covenant-keeping faithfulness to you. To just put the thing in a different way, do you thank God that his love is not like your love? What if God's love was like your love? What if God's hatred was like your hatred? What if God's mercy was like your mercy? I'll be merciful when they crawl on broken glass. Then I'll show mercy. Almost. Nothing in God's character, in terms of his, what some theologians call the moral attributes of his goodness, holiness, righteousness, truth and love, nothing in those is like what you find in us. We are created in his image so that what might be in us could be like what's in him, but with our sinful rebellion and hatred of his will, everything that is in us is different from what's in him. But whenever he speaks of those things, his love, his kindness, his mercy, his faithfulness, his truth, he says, well, it's just like the heavens are above the earth. That's how great the difference is. It's not just that there's a difference in capacity or a difference in the essential nature of God's thoughts, but there is a difference in the way they are in themselves compared to us. Because his thoughts are of an entirely different quality. They're entirely free of any self-interest. They're entirely free of anything which would seek to gain for himself on the basis of good and evil. And most of our thinking, most of the time, is in that category. So there are three things, firstly, to observe about Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9. I want to tell you a brief story. All of us, I think, have technical language. If you're a doctor or a nurse or a dentist or a lawyer or a teacher or a carpenter or a baker everyone has a technical language. Theologians have a technical language. It drives you distraction sometimes. And when you're within a world of accountancy or law or something, you can speak to one another in that technical language and it all makes sense. When you don't have that technical language, you sit on the outside thinking, is that another language altogether? Well, during last week I came across a technical phrase which I'd never heard before. It's a friend of mine who is an engineer, and I had a very strange noise underneath my car, and he offered to help me track down what this noise was. So we went around to his house because the garage was free. Someone had taken the trailer out, and we drove the car into the garage, and he and I descended alive into the pit, and we underneath the car, and we came out alive. Well, he more alive than me. And while we were there, we actually found the noise. It was 2 loose bolts, could have been fixed in 10 seconds. But typical male thing, we did all the complicated things first, and it was none of those. But one thing that he said, just as we were looking under the car, there was some line where the handbrake cables run. And he just said, matter-of-factly, oh, there's some witness marks up here to the handbrake cables movement. I thought, what? And then that phrase stuck with me. Oh, wait, witness marks. Witness marks. Like you could see on the underside of the car where the handbrake cable had been moving and rubbing, and that movement and etching away was a witness mark to what the handbrake cable had been doing. I thought, what a fine phrase that is, a witness mark. That, in fact, wasn't the noise. It was 2 loose bolts, which we should have spotted straight away. Or he should have. But that phrase stuck with me. And I think the world has its own witness marks. And those witness marks, I think, can be summarised in 3 words: power, position, and prestige. And as we develop systems whereby we gain power and advance our position, and enhance our prestige in the eyes of others, our professional brothers and sisters, the world, however we speak about that, we then say to the world, see, these are my witness marks. My power, my position, the prestige that I hold, they're witness marks to the fact that my thinking is together. I've mastered the technical skills. I've achieved. I've made my way through the political process. I can weigh up what's good and evil, and I can come to an outcome. I've got witness marks to prove it. And I was thinking about that phrase in relationship to our other reading from Matthew chapter 18. You might like to just turn that up. Don't lose Isaiah, because we'll be coming back to that. But in Matthew 18, as well as in other places in the New Testament, the disciples wanted to have those witness marks. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And he called a child to himself, and he set them before him, and said, "Unless you are converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom." Now, why did they want to know who would be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Well, as we read the gospel stories, it was not just a theoretical question for them, it was actually a specific question. It was, who amongst us? Will it be Peter? Will it be Andrew? Will it be John? Who will sit at the right hand? Who will sit at the left? Who's going to be greatest? Who will grant just this one thing. Remember that my sons would sit one at your right hand and one at the left hand in your kingdom. So who amongst us will finally have the witness mark of power and position at the right hand of the Son of God and the prestige that brings? Which one of us will have that to validate our status? And Jesus took a little child and put him in the midst. You know, when we attain those things, those witness marks tell us, well, you're all grown up now. You've got power and you've got position and you've got prestige and you've got authority that comes with that, so you're all grown up. And Jesus says, here's a little child. And no matter how long you live and no matter how long you have in eternity, strange way of speaking, you're never going to be anything but a little one. You're just little ones. Now this illustration, we need to get clear in our minds here that this child is being used as an illustration. He's not speaking specifically about chronologically young people in the rest of Matthew chapter 18. He says, unless you are converted, unless you turn and become as a little child, you will not. Now, therefore, the child is the illustration of what applies to the grown-up people, Peter and James and John, who want to know who's going to be greatest. And without going into it this morning because of time and other things, you would find if you follow the phrase through, a little one or one such child, that all the way through down to verse 14 refers to those who are lost, who find that the Father has sought them out. Verse 12, what do you think? If any man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 and go onto the mountains and go and search for the one that's straying? If he turns out that he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over it more than all the 99 which have not gone astray. So it is the will of your Father who is in heaven that none of these little ones perish. The little ones are the ones who've been found. The little ones are believers in him. The little ones are those who have turned, who have been converted, who have changed, who have realised that the witness marks of the world are wrong. And that recalibrates our thinking. Because a lot of the time I think we think of ourselves as big ones. Some of us are big ones. But grown up ones, you know. And we think even as Christians somehow that God is watching us in some way as to see whether we're going to be grown-ups about all this, and out of that we get this great big stiff upper lip thing. But it's an enormous relief and great revelation to realise that all the way through you're a little one. You have to be carried. You have to be led by the hand. You have to be, as it says in one translation of Isaiah chapter 66, you have to be dandled on the knee. You have to be a lamb, as it says in Isaiah 40, gathered up in his arms. And you have to be gently led along like a nursing ewe. You're never going to be, as Peter thought he was, a big one, striding out in the world, going his own way, doing his own thing. Peter had to learn that even up to the day that he finally died and went to be with the Lord in glory, he was a little one, And finally, beloved, you can't come through that as a big one. You have to be a little one, carried in his arms, carried in the palm of his hand, carried to the Father's household. And when Jesus speaks of us about little ones, as believers, we are all little ones. The main focus of what he's saying is, as little ones, you just trust the Father. You don't rely on your own cleverness, by your own thinking processes in order to accomplish what's good and evil according to your estimate. As a little one, you just trust the Father. As a little one, you don't try and weigh up. Is this good or is this bad? As a little one, you just hear the voice of your Father. And as a little one, you know that that one who is your Father provides for what you need when you need it. So the little ones in our household, as they've been growing up, didn't have to worry about how we were going to cook their porridge or whatever else. The process behind that, if we could extend the illustration a little, the thoughts and ways of the parents that have to go on in order to sustain the little one. The little one doesn't have to worry himself or herself about those. The little one just has to come and buy without cost and receive without payment. And so the little ones here have to, in their being converted and being turned, they have to turn from the witness marks of power and position and prestige. And I was thinking, well, what then is the witness mark that we have? What are our witness marks? And the witness mark is Christ. You don't have a witness mark to yourself. The witness mark is Christ. Christ is the witness, the faithful and true witness. Christ is the one who in the world shows to us the ways and thoughts and actions of God. And Christ incarnate among us, the Word become flesh, he is the one who, through that terrible agony of suffering on the cross, as the Father abandoned him up to our sin, there you see that cross in all of its horrible glory, if I could speak in a contradictory way. The horror of its judgment and the glory that it should be so. And there's the witness mark. My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways. And all of the positions of power and prestige and honour that you seek don't match with that. And that's the only thing that's true. So be converted. Become like a little child. Christ is your witness mark. You think, well, a witness mark to what? If you look back to Isaiah, chapter 55. Verse 7, let the wicked forsake his way, the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord. He will have compassion on him and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon, because my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, so are my thoughts higher than your thoughts. And then he says something which seems different. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven, and do not return there without watering the earth, and making it bear and sprout, and furnishing seed to the sower, and bread to the eater, so will my word be, which goes forth from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, without accomplishing what I desire, and without succeeding in the matter for which I sent it. You can understand those verses by changing one word. Don't ask, what is he speaking about in verses 10 and 11? Don't ask. Ask, who is he speaking about in verses 10 and 11? Who is he speaking about? He's speaking about his Word. Jesus, the Word, became flesh. And that Word comes out of the Father's mouth into the world. He is the expression of the thoughts of the Father in all his deeds and actions. If you have seen me, you've seen the Father. It's interesting, isn't it, that Jesus is able to say, I am the way. My way is not your way. And here he is, coming from the Father's glory, with the Father's blessing, under the Father's Spirit, to bring the little ones into his arms. And when he comes, he accomplishes the purpose for which he's been sent. And when he returns, he doesn't return with empty arms. He returns with a whole groaning load, groaning in heaviness but joyful in expression, of a redeemed that no man can number and a new creation on his shoulders. And he brings back the captives out of sin to the Zion of God. And as he does that, he goes out with joy. And he leads us forth with peace. And as he comes from the Father and gathers up these lost ones and brings all the little ones home to the Father, so the mountains and hills break forth. And there's shouts of joy before us. And the trees of the field clap their hands. And instead of the thorn bush, the cypress comes up. And at the end, what has God in his witness mark called Jesus Christ in the world accomplished? And what is the witness? Have a look. It will be as a memorial to the Lord, verse 13, an everlasting sign which will not be cut off. In the end, Jesus Christ comes back to the Father, and through all that he's accomplished, there's a new heavens and a new earth in which the curse is removed, and that stands forever as the sign that the Word has in fact done what God had purposed for him to do. And how did he do it? Well, here you have to go back into Isaiah chapter 53. Verse 13, behold, my servant will prosper, of Isaiah 52. He will be high and lifted up and greatly exalted. Just as many were astonished at you, my people, so his appearance was marred beyond more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. Thereby he will sprinkle many nations. Kings will shut their mouths on account of him. For what has not been told to them they will see, and what they have not heard they will understand. Who has believed our message? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of parched ground. He had no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, one like one from whom men hide their faces. We despised and esteemed him not. He didn't have the right witness marks according to our thinking. But surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him, and by his stripes we're healed. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. But the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. He was oppressed, he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that's led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that's silent before the shearers, he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living for his transgressions, for the transgressions of my people? His grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man in his death, because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth, no abstract thinking in him. But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. He rendered him as a guilt offering, and he would see his offspring and prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand, and as a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied, and by his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many, and he will bear their iniquities. That's how he's brought you back. He's come from the word of the Father, as the word of the Father, to accomplish all that the Father's purposed. And what the Father's purposed was to crush him, so that our iniquities would be removed. As far as the east is from the west, as far as the heavens are above the earth, so are my ways, not your ways, says the Lord. And he brings us back, little ones. Little ones, no matter how long we live, no matter how great an age we attain, we're little ones. We're brought back to the Father. And by that action which he completes, God the Father is satisfied. He sees the achievement of his righteous one, the servant, and he is satisfied. He said, yes, this is very good, that there is such a family in such a renewed heaven for eternity, as little ones who trust me, and as little ones who have abandoned their own knowledge of good and evil, as little ones who just hear my voice and live under my word. So, little ones, may the Lord bless the word to us. And if we need to, I just urge you this morning, be converted. Become as a little one. Give up on your own schemes and thinking.